What's good, everyone? Hopefully, you guys are doing well. It's just another beautiful day out here in California, IA. Hanging out with your boy Lee here. Yeah, it's just another day, man. It's Happy Mother's Day. I just want to wish all the mothers Happy Mother's Day. Just want to thank God for all the blessings of the mothers in our lives, and so Lord, thank you for that. But yeah, let's get started. I know I talked a few videos back about how I wanted to share a testimony because I think that context is very important. And so just kind of give you a little background about who I am, where I come from. And so, yeah, my ethnicity, I'm Hmong. And so we are a Asian ethnicity group that comes out of Northern China originally. And when I say originally, we're no longer there. We were there maybe about 2,000 years ago, north of the Yellow River. And it was there that we started migrating south because of conflict with the different Chinese dynasties during the time, the Chinese errors during the time. And so because we didn't want to submit to their authority, we were constantly in rebellion against them because we didn't want to be submissive. And so throughout the centuries, we have migrated further and further south. Now we're in the mountains of southern China and the mountains of Laos and the mountains of Vietnam and in the mountains of Thailand. And so, we're mountain people, but it's just because we're trying to escape persecution, and just because by nature we're rebellious, not only because we're rebellious by nature, it's just because the sin that's in us. And so we migrated further south. And so how my parents came here to the States was that during the time about let's say in the early 70s, mid 70s, that was what was happening with the Vietnam War. And after the Americans pulled out, our people were being genocided, our people being persecuted because we had a part to play in that war. Although for a long time, the United States or the government wouldn't admit that they had their part to play in it, simply because of whatever treaties they had at the time, and so they weren't supposed to be involved, but we were hired as secret guerrilla warfare in order to fight the communists, the Ho Chi Minh supply chain. And so, that's what we were doing. We were trying to disrupt their supply chain. And so, yeah, that's our part that we played in the Vietnam War. But after the Americans pulled out, we were being sought after, we were being persecuted. And so we ended up, a lot of us left Laos, and we ended up migrating to Thailand in order to seek asylum. And while we were seeking asylum there, we were waiting to be sponsored so that we can go to different places. And so many of us ended up in Australia, Europe, even Canada, but the majority of the population landed here in the United States. And so we got a big population among people here in the United States, mainly in Minnesota and Northern California. I'm not from neither one. I'm from Southern California. And so I didn't grow up around a lot of Hmong people, but I mean, when we were younger, there was a lot of Hmong people. And so the reason I give you my background is because it's just kind of want to give you an explanation where I came from and how everything transpired to be the way it was, And so even though my parents were Christians, a lot of the gospel was very shallow. And what I mean is that I don't think I ever heard the gospel in the Hmong church until not too long ago. And so growing up, all I heard was hails and brimstones, and every other thing was judgment. You're going to hell for the things that you're doing. And so when you're young, you're foolish, and you're not able to fully grasp or just fully understand what's going on, and all you hear is the adults telling me that you're going to go to hell. The things you're doing, you're going to go to hell. And so eventually, you just own up to it. You're like, okay, if that's the case, then I might as well just go full throttle, right? I'm all in. And so, I just started hanging out with the wrong crowd. And before you know it, I just started getting myself into all kinds of mix, and then my life started spiraling out, And the reason I wanted to just give you guys that background is because today there's a need for sound doctrine and biblical scholars who can help lead the next generation among leaders. And I say that because from my experience, I've seen a lot of mishandling of the word and scripture because culture plays too big of a role in the Hmong community, or in the Hmong church, I should say. And so a lot of times, even when the leaders are not biblically qualified or not biblically sound, they're leading the church because nobody else is willing to step up. And so now there has been a few generations of that, to where these leaders, they're not willing to step out of the way and allow some of the new younger guys who are trained, who are sound in doctrine, to help lead the church. And so culture plays a big role. And so because of that, you can tell the Hmong church is not growing. I'm not trying to put the Hmong church down, but I just want to say, I just wanted to put that out there. But I mean, if you guys want to hear about that more, I'll get about that more a little bit at a different time. Just comment that on below, to all my Hmong people. I love you guys. I'm praying for you guys, and I hope that that there is a spiritual awakening. I hope that the leaders realize that they need the next generation to help. They need the next generation to start filling in the roles and stepping up so that they can help lead the next generation, and so that's what I'm praying for, but for the meantime, yeah, even though I grew up in the church, I didn't know who God really was. I knew of God, but I didn't know God, and when I say that, it's because, like I said, the gospel was very shallow. And even when we were going up youth group, we weren't being taught the Bible. Youth group was about planning trips and things to do with other churches. But yeah, and so just going back to that, and so I've had a very shallow understanding of what the Bible was, or even what church was. And so but I mean, I knew of a God, and I say that was because while growing up, I got in a lot of trouble, and every time I would pray to God, I'm like, God, if you get me out of this, I would do whatever you want, and as soon as he would allow me to go home, I get right back into the mix. I'd be out there hanging with the wrong crowd, doing the wrong things. And eventually, as I got older, I got into my addiction. I was out there selling drugs, and before I was using what I was selling. And before my life even spiraled out even more, and it wasn't until one night where God really got a hold of me, and what happened that night was because we were actually homeless at the time. We were living in the car, and just my own addictions getting the best of me and my family. I was out there trying to hustle. I was trying to make ends meet. And in the process, I was trying to feed this own hunger that I had inside too, my addiction. And what ended up happening was, like, I almost ended up killing my whole family one night, but before leading up to that, there was a few nights where I felt like I was going to end up killing them anyways. But, those were just the demonic entities that was in my life, because I've opened the door to allowing these demonic entities to persuade me and to trick me and to cause me to see things that I wasn't, wasn't really true, and so, when I tell people this, a lot of times people think I'm crazy, or, it was the drugs. But I mean, even till this day, I know exactly what I saw, and I know exactly what happens. And sometimes it's hard to tell people because they don't quite understand. If you haven't been in my shoes, or you haven't been down this path, it's hard for you to understand. But when you do drugs, what ends up happening is you start opening doors to the demonic realm, allowing demonic spirits to come into your life and to deceive you, and so, I don't think that Christians could be possessed, but I do believe that Christians can be influenced by the demonic spirits. And so, even though I didn't have a strong relationship with God, I knew who God was, and so I know that in the process, God still protected me. But because I was doing the wrong thing, I was doing things that was breaking God's heart. I was allowing all these demonic spirits into my world, and they were doing all kinds of things to my family, and they were causing me to just lose grip of what reality was. Let's just put it like that. And so I thought that the best thing for me to do was to end my family's life, because what was happening was, like, my children were real young, my wife, and they weren't believers at the time, and so, like, the spirits were working through them. Lord's using them to really play with my mind. And so I ended up thinking that the best option for me was that I kill everybody. And so one night, that's what I tried doing. We were up in the mountains, like I said, we were homeless at the time. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go off this cliff, and I pondered about it a few nights. We went up there a few nights prior to that, but that one night I decided like, this is it. I'm done and I'm going to do it. And my logic behind it was that, you know, if I go off this cliff, everybody would die. They would all go to heaven and I would be the one to face the consequence. And my logic behind this is because, you know, you hear stories all the time about how drunk people get in these accidents. They kill everybody in the car but themselves, you know? And so that was my logic behind it. I figured that if I went off this cliff, everybody would die. They would no longer have to experience the negativity or all this demonic influence or entities that were interfering with my life. And so I felt that that was the best option. And so what I ended up doing was that night, we were in the mountains and I drove off the cliff. And as soon as I got to the cliff, for some strange reason, the car got stopped. I don't know what it is at the time, but now looking back, I know it was the hand of God that stopped that car from that night. I thought that the best thing to do was to end my family's life and to pay the consequences. But God had a different plan, because that night I drove off that cliff, but for some divine reason, that car got stuck at the edge. And so while I was there trying to gas the car to go over the cliff, and I remember just trying to gas it and gas it, gassing it and gassing it, and it was stuck. And I look over to my girlfriend and wife now, and she looks at me and she just straps on her seatbelt because she knows that she knows something bad is about to happen. You know, and so I'm sitting there, I'm gassing, I'm looking at her, and next thing you know, I see flames coming out the side of her window, and I'm just like, and I look to my left and I see the flame coming up the side of my window as well. So what ended up happening was that after I tried to gas it and it wouldn't go off the cliff, for some reason there was brushes under the vehicle that started up a fire under the car. And it was at that moment when I seen those flames that I snapped out of it. We both jumped out the car. We pulled out our 3 younger kids at the time in the car, and we took off, you know. And as we were trying to find some place to go, it was late. It was like 2, 3 in the morning, and we were still in the mountains and it was freezing cold. And then we ended up taking up our shirts and we wrapped our kids around it. And it was during that time when I finally broke down and I just said like a simple prayer, like, God help. And that's all I said. I said, God help. And we just kept going. We kept moving. And we ended up finding this house top of the mountain. And there was a truck there. And so I go and I open up the truck door and I look in there and I'm like, oh, the keys are in here. And so I jumped in and I started up the car and the car started. And so I'm like, hey, get in. And so my wife jumps in. We got all the kids in and then we take off. And as we're leaving, it's like a one-way driveway into that, to where that house was. And as we were driving out, there we saw at the gates were the police cars and the fire truck. And my heart was pounding at the time, but for some strange reason, as we drove right by them, it seemed like there was this cloud that came over our vehicle to where it seemed like we were invisible, because I drove right by the cops and right by the fire truck as if we didn't even exist. And so from there, what's crazy is I just take off downtown. Not downtown, but from the mountains. We ended up at a friend's house. We leave the car down the street. We end up staying the night, but I'm still tripping out. And so in the next morning, we get in a fight, and then the cops are called, and they ended up linking me and my wife to that vehicle because our car was the one that was being burnt up in the mountains. And so what's crazy too is with that story with that car, because after we get charged, the owner, there was a testimony in there stating that the owner was just surprised because that the car was working, because the car had a blown head gasket. The car should have never started in the first place. And so if that's not the hand of God, I don't know what is. But, you know, like I said, just that one simple cry, God, I need your help. I messed up. God just put his hand over us, you know. And it was crazy because even in the courtroom, you know, when I was facing my sentence, the first week I was there, they were trying to give me 7 years because I'm a striker. They were trying to double me up, you know. But what ends up happening when we go back to court the next day, you know, I'm just praying on God, you know. And I the night before, you know, there was just some peace in my heart because I knew without a doubt that I owed God this time. And so whatever happened, I made up my mind that I deserved it, you know. And so what's crazy was we go into the courtroom, and first thing when I'm talking to my public defender and my wife's in front, she's talking to her, and I told her, honey, go home. I'm gonna take the rap for this. Go home. And my girl was kind of gangster about this, so it's like, no, I'm taking the rap because I don't have no record. I'm like, no, you go home and you get the kids. And like I said, there was just this piece of being able to just to there was a piece about not being selfish for once in my life, you know. And what's crazy was because things just started changing in that courtroom as well, you know. For those of you who've ever been in court, you know that when you're sitting there waiting for your turn, you're not allowed to speak to anybody, or even if it's your co-defendant or whatever, you're not allowed to speak or look at them or anything like that. But what's crazy was that after me and my wife took after I pled guilty to it, what's crazy was the judge was like, hey, why don't you get up and give her a hug? And that's crazy. It's never happened before. And the judge allowed me to give my wife a hug while we were in court. On top of that, when they bring us back in to our holding cells, it was a late day for the court. I mean, I think we didn't get seen until after lunch, like right after lunch. And so me and her was the only one there. And so the jailer or the officer who had brought us back into the jail cell, what's amazing was that he allowed us to sit right next to each other. He put her in one cell, and we were next to each other. We spent the next 3-4 hours just talking, you know. And I don't know what it was, but I think it was just me just super excited. So I was just sharing her, and I was like, no, babe, don't worry about this. God's got this. And we were just amazed by what was happening in the court, and I told her, like, look, just go home, get the kids. I don't care what you do, but go to church. Go to church. And so what ends up happening is I get 32 with 80s. That's 32 months with 80%. Comes out to be like 26 months or something. So about 2 years and some change. And so while I went back to the county, they and was getting ready to be shipped off to reception for prison, she ends up going home, and she ends up finding a place. One of my friends takes her in, and helps her out. And as I'm taking my journey on with God and just accepting the responsibilities of the damage that I've done, I start hearing things, from my wife about, how just God's been opening the doors for her, helping her get a job, helping her get a car, helping her get the kids back. And every time these things were happening, my faith grew. And when I first started following Jesus, like I said, I started in prison, and to be honest, I have an 8th grade education, y'all. 8th grade education. And I say that because when I started reading the Bible, I used to read the Bible in one hand, and I used to have my dictionary in the other, because there was a lot of words that I didn't understand. I assumed I knew what they were, and when I looked it up in the dictionary, I was completely off. And so because of that, I used to read my Bible with my dictionary, and I spent the next 26 months doing that, and it was there during that time too that God had given me a desire to go back to school, and I remember I had a dream one night that I was driving my brother-in-law's car at the time. He had this big old Buick, and I was driving it, but for some reason, like, I just couldn't get it to go where I needed it to go. I was trying to get into town, and in my dream, I was trying to get into town. And when I'm trying to make these turns, it was like a boat. It was like I was driving this big old boat, and I was running into everybody's mailbox, and everything was just like, it was a mess. I was like, I know how to drive. What's going on here? And so I was able to manage to get back on the freeway to get back into town. And as I was getting on the freeway, what I see is this cop pulling really fast right up next to me. And he opens up his window, and he yells at me. He says, "You're going down the wrong way." And as soon as he said that, a car smashed right into him, head-on collision. And when I look forward, all I see is these collisions, and I see cars coming my way because I was on the wrong side of the road. I was going against traffic, not with traffic. And so I'm there, and I'm trying to dodge with this big old boat, or this big old car that was driving like a boat. And then I get to the next on-ramp, but I was trying to use it as an off-ramp. And so there was a big, sharp left turn, and as I was going up, I was trying to make this left turn, but this thing was driving like a boat. I'm over here trying to tug, trying to make that left turn, and I knew we were gonna crash. And what ends up happening is we go over and we crash. We're in this valley, we're in this ditch, and then we crawl out of there. And then when we crawled out of there, what ends up happening is, man, lawnmower going. Hey, sorry for that, y'all. But what ends up happening is we crawl up out of there, and right across the street is there's a mall. It's the Cabazon Outlet. That's what I was visioning in my dream. And we get there, and we don't have no clothes. We were shabby. We're naked. It was just our clothes were a mess. We just came out and we were in a mess. And so we walk across the street, and I find this wallet. It's crazy because I find this wallet, and I see all these credit cards, and they have my name on it. The only thing that was different about it was that there was a word in front. And there was the word doctor in front. It was my name on those cards, but it was the word doctor. And I was telling my wife, like, hey, babe, this is my name. These are my cards, but I'm no doctor. And so I remember shaking off that dream, waking up, and I'm just like, I knew that the reason I was having that vision was because I was the one in control of my life. And that vehicle that I was driving was me in control, driving down the wrong side of the road. And I needed to crash. I needed to fall flat on my face so that God can get a hold and so God can get my attention. And so everything that happened, I realized it hit me like, dang, like what ended up happening was that was my life. I was going down the wrong side of the road. And I needed to fall on my face. I needed to lose everything. And so that's what ended up happening. I lost all control. But also that vision with the doctor on my name, after seeing that, God gave me a desire to go back to school. And so, like I said earlier, I only had like an 8th grade education. I went to high school, but the first day of high school, I almost got expelled, And so I was ditching school all the times. And so I never went to school. So I don't have any credit from the high school, none. And so what I decided to do, I was there, like God gave me a desire to go to school. So I went in and got my GED, and that was difficult too, I remember the first pre-test to the GED, and I was trying to write an essay. It was, I think, like 6 sentences or 3 paragraphs. It was one of those. And it took me like 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours to write it. And I was so happy when I got done with it, and I brought it back to the teacher at the school in the prison yard, and he looked at it and he was just like, your writing is very crude. And I'm like, what do you mean it's very crude? I thought I did a great job, right? But I was upset because I'm like, what do you mean crude? I didn't quite understand what the word was, and I was so upset that after I left, I actually went to my dictionary and I looked it up, and it just meant that I was ungraceful with my speech. And so that does play an important role in my education as well, because I remember when I started going to college, well, before we get to that, and so that's very crude. I was just upset. But come to find out, I'm not very graceful with the way I present my sentences or how I structure my sentences. And a lot of it just has to do with, like I said, with my background. My first language is Hmong. I actually learned English in school. And so because my mom wanted to teach me the language, she wouldn't speak to me in English. And so she only spoke to me in Hmong. And so a lot of the English that I learned was broken English. And so not only that, but a lot of my friends spoke broken English. And so that's what actually, transcribed into the letter or the paperwork that I was writing. It was just broken English. And so, with that being said, I ended up getting my GED while I was in prison. And then from there, when I got released, I remember released. That was the first time in my life I was actually afraid to come home, because normally when I'm coming home, I'm excited, get to see my family. I haven't seen them in like over 2.5 years, but not 2.5, but 2 and some change. And there's another story about that too, but I'll leave that for another time. But yeah, so what ends up happening is I get released. Like I said, first time in my life, I'm afraid to go home because I didn't want to go home and throw away everything that God had been working with me over the past 2 years. I'm glad that God only saw that I needed 2 and some change, because to be honest, I deserved life, for the wickedness that was in me that for the wrong that I did. But I'm glad that God saw something different. I'm glad that God saw that I only needed that much time away. And so I ended up coming home, and I remember coming home, and I didn't know what to do with my life. I knew that God had called me to school, but I didn't know how. And so I remember meeting my parole, and he was like, "What are you gonna do?" I'm like, "Well, my plans are I'm gonna get a job. I'm gonna go to school." I was like, "Hey, do you have any resources, or do you know if felons can get any scholarships or any financial aid?" And he told me no. Kind of heartbroken, but I'm glad I didn't listen to him. And so I actually went back and I did some research and Google search, and I ended up finding out that as long as you haven't as long as you have not committed a crime in the past 2 years, or if it's drug related, then you should be good. You're able to qualify for financial aid. And so it was great, so I was able to do that. And then I remember applying for school, and then like just jumping through hoops, man. It was challenging, it's challenging because I was navigating waters. I was treading on waters I've never been on. And so, having to try to validate that I am a California citizen, because I've been in prison for the past 2.5 years. And so they wanted record, like, where have I been? They wanted like bills and things like that, but I didn't have any, because if I didn't have any, the school was going to charge me the out of state price. But luckily I was able to go get my minutes order from the court, stating that I was in California. I was in the California state prison system. And so that being said, I was able to get the California prices. So financial aid covered all that. And so when I went to school, I didn't know, I have no idea what I was doing. I was just going because I felt that God was calling me there. And so the first college I went to was Mount San Jacinto. Shout out to them. And shout out to the EOPS. They are the EOPS counselors. It was a blessing to have them, because I remember going to see the other counselors, and they were confusing me every semester about what I needed to do, and things were always changed. But I'm glad that when I got to the EOPS counselor, I even forgot what it stands for, but I just remember it's EOPS counselor, and they kept me on track. They helped me to create an ed plan that would suffice for where I was going. And what I mean by that is, they help plan you. I help you take the classes that you need, and not just take a bunch of classes that you don't need. And so shout outs to MSJC, especially the EOPS counselor. So that's where I end up getting my AA. And then from there, I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know where God was leading me, but I'm so thankful that God has always made sure that godly men were in my life, directed me in the right path. And so at the time, I was speaking to our pastor, and he had said that, have you tried CBU? And I'm like, no, I don't even know what CBU is, ignorant to everything. But and so he's like, yeah, why don't you try? And so I ended up filling out the application for CBU. And I remember getting down to a question where they were asking, have I ever committed a felon? And, every time I get to that question, even to this day, my heart just drops, because the old me, the old Lee wants to lie. I want to tell you that, no, I've not committed anything, but I'm so thankful that God has been working in my life. And so when I get there, I remember this voice telling me, just be honest, and then so I struggled with that, but you know what? I was honest. I put everything on there. I put all my convictions. I went and got all my minute order from the court, and I just put it on there, and I sent it off, and I brushed it off because I didn't think they were going to accept me. I didn't think they were going to give me the time of day. And so, but like by the grace of God, like a month and a half later, they called me, and the dean of administration, he was like, I'm looking over your application, and there's some questions that I want to talk to you about, about some of the things that you mentioned in your application. Do you have time to come to the school? And so, because I want to have a face-to-face conversation with you, but at the same time, I also want you to meet the dean of security or the heads of security, whatever it was. He was like, he's an ex-cop, but I want you to meet him too. And so, I didn't think of nothing to it. I just go and I go and I just kind of share what God has been doing in my life. And it's amazing because God just opens doors that are not meant to be open. And so what ends up happening is after sharing my testimony, how God has been working in my life, they both agree that, we see that God is doing something in your life. And so we want to give you the opportunity to come here. And it just blew my mind, it just blew my mind that they were going to give me an opportunity to be there, a felon, right? At a Christian private school. And so I was super excited. I walk out the door, and then all of a sudden reality hits. How am I going to pay for this? I'm a felon. I work part-time, and now I'm about to go to school here. And school at the time was like 35 a year. And so I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. But then, instead of tripping out about it, I just put it in God's hand. I'm like, God, if you got me here, you're going to finish this, right? And so what ends up happening is that I'm able to get some scholarships. The church blesses me with some scholarship as well, and just with the financial aid, and even with they have this program called Transfer Gold or whatever, because if you have over a certain amount of GPA, they give you some extra money to help pay for the schooling. So I ended up leaving and graduating CBU with bachelor's in Christian studies, debt free, and so, and not only that, but I still had some money left over. And so after I graduated CBU, I didn't know where to go. I was just kind of like, okay, I knew that I wanted to go to seminary. I didn't know where, because there was some criteria that I had, like it had to be close. I wanted it to be in person. And so I was very limited to where I can go because I have a family, I got to work, and I do better when I'm in a school setting. And so I was kind of afraid to do the online stuff. Never done it before. And so was looking for a seminary at the time, and luckily, like I said, God always puts the right people in your life at the right time. And I remember there was a brother who I was at CBU with, and he was like a year or two ahead of me, and he was like, "Have you thought about Gateway Seminary?" And I was like, "No, I don't. I didn't even know there was a Gateway Seminary." Because Gateway Seminary originally was up north, like San Francisco Bay area, but now they have a campus out in Ontario, and I didn't know that. But he was like, "Yeah, why don't you try there?" And so I ended up doing is I applied there, and I applied there, and same thing happens again. That question comes up again, like, have you ever been convicted of a felon? And like I said, every time I come to that question, I cringe. My heart just drops because I'm guilty, and I know we live in a world where when people see that on applications, they kind of just brush you off. And so, but hey, by the grace of God, if he was faithful once, he'd be faithful again. And so I just put everything down there. Same thing I put on my application when I went to CBU, and they didn't even hassle me about it. They didn't even hassle me about it. And so I ended up going to Gateway Seminary, and I ended up graduating from there with a master's in theological studies, and what's trippy about the whole thing was that I was able to get financial aid and scholarships. On top of that, whatever money I had left over contributed towards my my master's degree. And what's crazy is that I finished from my AA all the way to my master's degree with only coming out $300 out of my pocket. And now if that's not God, I don't know what is, but I ended up graduating with a master's degree with only paying $300 out of my pocket. And that was my last semester. And so, there's a lot more. I know I didn't get into the details of everything, but, I just want to give you the gist of, my testimony, what's happened in my life. And I want to encourage you guys with this, I want to encourage you guys that with God, there is nothing that's impossible, If you're willing to put your faith in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, he can use you in ways that you can never imagine, And I say that because growing up, I'd assumed that I only had two options. Either I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail or I was going to die very young. But God had a different plan. God had a different plan, and I say that because, I never thought that I was going to go to school. And yet God brought me through that. And not only did he brought me through that, but I was able to graduate, with honors, and it's crazy, and my desire is still to go back to school and to get my doctorate degree. But right now it's a time where I need to focus on the most important ministry in my life, and that's my family. And so that right now I'm taking the time away from school so that I can focus on my family. Once my youngest is 15, once he's done with high school, then if God is still calling me, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to finish my doctorate. But what I want to do is I just want to encourage you guys, God is real. Jesus is real. And if you're willing to put your faith in him, faith in that he died on the cross for your sins, that he rose again, and right now he's sitting in the right hand of God. If you're willing to put your faith in that, then there is no limit to what God can do in your life. And I say that because God has done an amazing thing in my life. I'm a sinner. I'm a felon. And yet God brought me from the prison halls, from the prison walls to seminary halls. And I just want to encourage you guys with this, because I hope that you're encouraged, and I hope that you're blessed by my testimony, just to understand that with God, all things is possible. There's nothing that God cannot do if you're willing to put your faith in his son, that Jesus Christ died for you on the cross and that he rose again on the third day. And right now he's reigning in heaven and he's coming back. And he's coming back. And so I hope that you're encouraged because, when I think about my life, there was a time where I didn't think that I was amount to anything. Like I said, I only had two options. But by the grace of God, he had a different plan, and not only in my life, but when you read the Bible, there is countless testimonies about how God has raised a dead man and given him life. Like say, for example, the Apostle Paul, right? Paul was a murderer. He was out there persecuting the church, and yet God was able to change his life and use him in a powerful way that today we have so much of his writings to the church because of what God has done in his life. And he's a motivator. He's an encourager. And not only that, but when you think about Peter, who denies Jesus 3 times, right? God uses him to lay the foundation of the church. On top of that, even in the Old Testament, when we think about Moses, right? Moses was a murderer. God had to humble him. He was in the desert for 40 years, and then God brought him back to lead the children of Israel out of slavery. And when you look at all these men's life, they weren't perfect. But yet God was able to use them. And so I hope that you're encouraged by this, that even though I was a mess up and I'm a felon, God is able to use me. He brought me from the prison walls to the seminary halls. And by his grace, I'm saved today. And so I want to encourage you that if you're not putting your faith in Jesus, put your faith in Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Repent from your sins and submit to him. Submit. And so, like I said, I hope that you're encouraged by this. I know this is a bit long, but yeah. If you have any questions or any comments, go ahead and put them down below. And if there's anything that you guys would like for me to share more, comment it down below. It gives me things to talk about. Yeah. And so, yeah, go ahead and comment below. If you have questions, put it down below, and I'll try to put out another video or something like that. But with this channel here, I've decided that, this is my testimony is going to be on this channel, but I'm going to start another channel. And what I want to do is I want to do Bible studies on that channel. And I think my first series, we're going to start off in the book of John, the Gospel of John. And I think it's so important. And so, yeah, that's what I'm going to plan to do. And so this is my testimony. And I think this channel here is just going to be for me, just enjoying God's creation on Servant of God MTV. But I'm going to start another channel. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but I do know that in that channel, it's going to be more focused on the Bible and more focused on God. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the Bibles verse by verse. We're going to look at the context. We're going to look at the meaning of the word. We're going to look at some Greek. I have some Greek experience. I'm no expert, but we're going to look at context of the word and what they mean in order to really understand what the Bible is saying, and so that we can apply it to our life in a way that it glorifies God. But not only that it glorifies God, but that we can be a light in a world that is so dark. And so I don't want to mislead people. So I want to be truthful with how I study. I want to be faithful with how I study. And I don't want to take God's word out of context. I don't want to misuse it. I don't want to misapply it. And so that's going to be the next channel. The next channel is, it's going to be focused on God, focused on sound doctrine, sound teaching. And so we're going to walk through the Bible verse by verse, and we're going to start off in the book of John. And so I hope that you guys would join then. I hope that you guys would subscribe, and I hope that you guys just help this channel grow, because all I want to do is I want to share the gospel. And I want to share it in a way that's biblical. And I don't want to put my input and intakes into it, but I just want to give you guys the truth. And so if you guys want to join me on that journey, then yeah, stay tuned. Eventually I'm going to post it up, and then I'll let you guys know when that channel happens. But I know that's where the direction is going. These two channels I'm going to split my MTB stuff. I'm just going to do that's my fun. That's my leisure time. That's my therapy time, and my other time is just me and God, focusing on God and helping others to understand what the Bible is teaching and helping us to have a deeper relationship with God. But the key thing is for me is that I want to give you guys the 3Ds. The 3Ds. I want to help you to, number one, discern. Oh no, let me take back. To help you do three things. Number one, I want you to help you to discover the truth for yourself. Number two, I want to help you to discern the truth from the lie. And number three, I want to help you deepen your relationship with God. And so it's going to be focused on the 3Ds: discover, discern, and deepen. And so I hope that you guys would join me on that. And I hope that you guys would subscribe. And if you like this content, comment, if there's something that you like for me to talk about, go ahead and just put it down there, put it in the comments, and, I'll try to, I'm new at this. And so I'll try to answer as much as I can. And so right now I still have the free time. Well, I don't have free time. I work, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put out at least once a week a video, and then the studies will be once a week. And I hope that you are going to be blessed by it. And so, I pray that God would just work that out for his glory, and so for all of you who are tuning in, thank you. I know this is quite long, but I'm just truly blessed that you guys would even give me the time to listen. And so I just want to pray over you that God would bless you. And I pray that you would have favor among men and that you would have favor among God. And I just pray that all your needs would be met. And so thank you so much. You guys have a blessed day. And hey, just remember, Jesus is king, y'all. Jesus is king. All right. Peace, y'all. See you guys next time.